The Senate chamber crackled with tension as Senator John Neely Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican, renowned for his folksy Southern charm and incisive legal mind, leaned into his microphone, his steady gaze piercing through the room to lock on to Rachel Maddow at the witness table. In the next 30 seconds, a clash would unfold that would ignite social media, leaving millions buzzing. Had the celebrated MSNBC host just been outmaneuvered by a senator with a drawl? Before we dive into this riveting showdown, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. This is political theater at its rawest, a battle of wits that would elevate one star and shake another's foundation. The anticipation had been brewing for weeks. John Kennedy, a seasoned lawmaker whose blend of homespun anecdotes and courtroom-honed precision had made him a GOP standout, was set to lead a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on constitutional limits to regulatory power. For years, Kennedy had captivated audiences with his ability to distill complex legal debates into relatable tales, earning him a loyal following, and the nickname the Bayou Barrister. His speeches, peppered with Southern idioms, had swayed voters and inspired op-eds, while his books on federalism were staples in conservative circles. This hearing was meant to be routine, a platform for Kennedy to flex his legal chops, field friendly questions from allies, and deflect predictable jabs from opponents. Across the table sat Rachel Maddow, the progressive media titan, whose razor-sharp commentary dominated cable news. To the casual observer, she was a heavyweight, a Yale Law alum, with a knack for dissecting policy with surgical precision. Her nightly show drew millions, her books topped charts, and her dry wit had long been a weapon against conservative talking points. Yet whispers among legal insiders noted her courtroom days were distant, her expertise now more performative than practiced. The hearing promised a straightforward script. Maddow would testify on administrative law breeze, through Democratic softballs, parry Republican barbs, and leave with clips for her next broadcast. But as she adjusted her notes and met Kennedy's unflinching stare, the room sensed a storm brewing. C-SPAN cameras whirred, and had Kennedy vs. Maddow began trending before the first question. To understand the stakes, consider the players. Rachel Maddow was no mere pundit. She was a cultural force. Her Rhodes Scholar pedigree, federal clerkship, and bestsellers like Drift cemented her as the liberal intelligentsia's champion. Nightly, she dissected GOP policies with a blend of gravitas and sarcasm, often mocking what she called folksy frauds, who leaned on charm over substance. Her fans revered her as a truth-teller, hanging on her every word when she framed legal debates as morality plays. When Maddow spoke, progressives listened, convinced her analysis cut through conservative noise. John Kennedy, however, was no ordinary senator. A veteran of Louisiana's legal trenches, he'd spent years as a practicing attorney navigating high-stakes cases where a single misstep could cost dearly. His Oxford education and LSU law degree were impressive, but it was his real-world experience arguing motions, drafting appeals, facing judges that shaped his edge. Unbeknownst to Maddow, Kennedy's team had studied her playbook, every segment where she'd scoffed at Southern politicians, every quip about backwoods rhetoric, every claim to legal authority without recent practice. They'd pinpointed her weakness, a confidence that her polished delivery could outshine gritty expertise. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a referendum on who could claim mastery over America's legal discourse. Could a media star armed with credentials and charisma hold her own against a senator whose folksy veneer masked a steel-trap mind? Was airtime expertise enough when pitted against courtroom scars? For Maddow, this was a chance to cement her status as a legal sage, framing conservative senators as out-of-touch relics. For Kennedy, it was an opportunity to prove that substance, not style, defined true authority, and to turn Maddow's own arrogance against her. The room buzzed with onlookers. Cable news crews angled for shots expecting Maddow to deliver sound bites for the evening cycle. Progressive reporters anticipated a rout. Conservative outlets hoped Kennedy's wit would steal the show. Behind Kennedy, a single aide with a notepad. Behind Maddow, a team of producers' tablets glowing with prepped responses. The early questions followed script. Maddow expounded on regulatory frameworks, quoting scholars with practiced ease. Democrats tossed gentle queries, letting her shine. Kennedy listened, his pen tapping softly, a faint smile playing on his lips, like a fisherman waiting for the bite. Then his moment arrived. Ms. Maddow Kennedy began his Louisiana drawl, rolling out like molasses. "You've made quite a name for yourself, tellin' folks how the law ought to work. Been real vocal about how some of us senators, myself included, I reckon turned these hearings into something akin to a comedy show with our down-home talk. Now, I ain't one to fuss over a little ribbon, but I'm curious, when's the last time you stood in a courtroom making a case where someone's livelihood hung on your words?" The chamber stilled. Maddow's smile tightened her eyes, narrowing slightly as she leaned forward. "Senator Kennedy, with all due respect to your colorful style, I'd say your penchant for folksy one-liners makes this chamber feel more like a stand-up routine than a serious legal forum. As for my work, I've analyzed more constitutional issues on air than most attorneys tackle in a decade of small-town practice." A chuckle rippled from the Democratic side, but Kennedy's grin didn't waver. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Well, ma'am, I'll grant you the stage is yours come 9 o'clock on MSNBC, but let's talk shop. You said last month on your show that Chevron deference is the bedrock of agency power untouchable by Congress. Care to walk us through how that holds up after Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, or should I pull the case for you?" Maddow's composure held, but a flicker of hesitation crossed her face. "That's a recent decision, Senator, and while it adjusts the scope of deference, it doesn't dismantle the core principle. Much like your anecdotes don't dismantle the need for rigorous legal analysis." Kennedy's eyes twinkled, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial drawl. "Adjusts, you say, Ms. Maddow, that ruling sent Chevron packing faster than a cat on a hot tin roof. Courts now review agency actions fresh, no bowing to bureaucrats. But let's try another. You called the Administrative Procedure Act's notice and comment rules flexible on air. How's that square with Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Corp. v. Natural Resources Defense Council? Or is that one just a prop in your nightly script?" The room tensed. Maddow shifted her response, measured but strained. "The APA allows leeway, Senator. Vermont Yankee emphasizes judicial restraint, not rigid adherence to process." Kennedy's brow lifted, his drawl sharpening. "Leeway, ma'am. The court said those rules are the law's spine agencies skip 'em at their peril. Sounds like you might have misread that one under the studio lights." The gallery stirred. Maddow pressed on, aiming for a jab. "Your law degree's fine, Senator, but let's be real. Your Aw Shucks Act is more about charming voters than parsing statutes. Isn't this hearing just another stage for your Southern shtick?" Kennedy paused, letting the barb hang, then chuckled, a low rolling sound that filled the silence. "Shtick. Maybe so, Miss Maddow. But this old boy's been in courtrooms where a bad day meant someone lost their home, not their ratings. You want to talk stages. When's the last time you filed a brief that wasn't for a segment, or faced a judge who didn't care for your Q score?" The exchange caught fire. Maddow doubled down, mocking Kennedy's vaudeville vibe, while he countered with pinpoint citations, INS Verchada, where she flubbed the legislative veto's scope, State Farm, where her take on rulemaking crumbled. Each misstep exposed her polish as thin. Each of Kennedy's retorts laced with humor landed like a gavel. "You call this a circus?" she snapped once. "Ma'am," he shot back. "At least in a circus folks practice before they juggle." The tide turned. Maddow stumbled on a question about the non-delegation doctrine, mixing it with due process, while Kennedy spun a yarn about not letting the hired help rewrite the boss's rules, unpacking the law with clarity that had even Democrats nodding. Social media erupted clips of his hot tin roofline, racked up shares, had Kennedy Clapback soaring. Maddow's team signaled for a pause, but Kennedy pressed. "One last thing, Ms. Maddow. Under State Farm, what's the test for an agency flippin' its policy without cause? Arbitrary, capricious sound, familiar, or just words you read off a prompter?" Her answer veered into generalities, and Kennedy pounced his drawl, now a velvet hammer. "The court says you explain, or you lose, ma'am. Reckon that's a lesson for more than just agencies." The room fell silent save for the hum of cameras. Maddow, visibly rattled, mustered a weak retort, but the chair called time. As she gathered her papers, Kennedy offered a nod. "Good talk, Rachel. Next time bring a casebook, 'stead of a script." The moment was electric. A viral fuse lit. Within hours, the clip-dominated feeds Kennedy's quips memed into oblivion. Maddow's fumble dissected by legal blogs. His Star Rose Law Schools invited him to lecture. His mailbag swelled with praise. Maddow's aura dimmed her next show, pivoting to safer ground, but the sting lingered. The hearing wasn't just a win. It was a reminder in the arena of ideas. A sharp mind and a true story trump a spotlight every time. The Senate chamber pulsed with a restless energy as Senator John Neely Kennedy, his Louisiana drawl as warm as a summer evening, leaned back in his chair, his eyes still locked on Rachel Maddow. The air still crackled from their opening salvo, where Maddow had taken a swing at his folksy style, branding it a vaudeville act, unfit for the gravity of the Judiciary Committee. Her jab about his law degree had landed with a smirk, but Kennedy's calm, almost mischievous grin signaled he was far from rattled. The gallery, packed with reporters and aides, sensed the tide shifting. What had started as Maddow's stage was becoming Kennedy's courtroom, and he was about to cross-examine the witness with a precision honed in Louisiana's legal trenches. Social media was already alight with snippets of their clash, and the next few minutes would pour fuel on the fire, cementing Kennedy's reputation as a master of substance wrapped in Southern charm. Kennedy tapped his pen lightly against his notepad, the rhythm deliberate like a metronome, setting the pace for what was to come. "Ms. Maddow," he began, his voice carrying that familiar bayou lilt, "you've got a mighty fine way with words. Been tellin' folks on your show that us senators, well, me in particular, ain't got the legal horsepower to keep up with your big city analysis. Now, I'm just a fella from Zachary, Louisiana, so maybe I'm missin' something. But let's test that horsepower. You said last week that the Administrative Procedure Act lets agencies bend rules when the stakes are high. Mind walking us through how that holds up under, say, West Virginia v. EPA? Maddow, poised as ever, adjusted her glasses and leaned into the microphone, her tone clipped but confident. "Senator, the APA provides agencies with flexibility to act in the public interest, especially in emergencies. West Virginia v. EPA doesn't negate that it's about limiting overreach, not handcuffing agencies entirely. But let's be honest, your folksy metaphors might charm the voters, but they don't clarify the law. This isn't a town hall, it's the Senate." A murmur of approval rose from the Democratic side, and a few reporters scribbled furiously. Maddow's jab at Kennedy's style, his folksy metaphors, was a calculated escalation, painting him as a lightweight, playing to the crowd. But Kennedy didn't flinch. His smile widened, the kind of grin you'd see on a farmer who just spotted a fox in the henhouse. Well, ma'am, I reckon a good story's worth 1,000 briefs, but let's stick to the law. You say flexibility. The Supreme Court in West Virginia v. EPA said agencies can't rewrite statutes just 'cause they feel the urge. Major questions, doctrine, ring a bell. Or is that one lost in the glare of your studio lights? The chamber hushed. Maddow's pause was brief but noticeable, her fingers flipping through her notes. The major questions doctrine, Senator, applies to extraordinary cases, not routine rulemaking. You're oversimplifying a complex issue which frankly fits your style, more flair than depth. Her retort drew a few nods from her allies, but the room's energy had shifted. Kennedy's question wasn't just a jab, it was a trap, and Maddow's response had sidestepped the core issue. Kennedy leaned forward, his drawl softening, but his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Oversimplifying, huh? Let's keep it simple then, like a Sunday sermon. The court said Congress don't delegate big-ticket calls. Economic, political, you name it, without saying so loud and clear. EPA tried to play legislator, and the justices shut it down. You called that routine on your show last month. So, Ms. Maddow, care to tell this committee what part of a $1 trillion climate rule counts as routine, or is that another one of them flexible moments you keep talking about? The gallery stirred a low ripple of gasps and whispers. Maddow's face tightened her usual polish fraying. Senator, you're misconstruing the ruling. West Virginia v. EPA was about scope, not a blanket ban on agency action. My point stands. Agencies need room to address urgent issues, something your anecdotes might obscure for your base. Her voice held steady, but the deflection was clear she hadn't answered the question. Kennedy's chuckle rolled through the room warm, but pointed like a neighbor calling out a tall tale. Obscure, ma'am. The only thing getting obscured here is the law you're dodging. Let's try another. On your program, you said the non-delegation doctrine's a relic about as useful as a horse and buggy in a Tesla showroom. Now, I ain't no fancy scholar, but I recall Panama refining Coney v. Ryan making it clear Congress can't just hand agencies a blank check. You want to explain why you think that's outdated? Or should I fetch the case for you? Maddow's eyes narrowed, her response sharper now, tinged with irritation. Senator, Panama refining is nearly a century old. Modern governance requires agencies to adapt, not be hamstrung by outdated precedents. Your reliance on dusty cases might play well in Louisiana, but it doesn't address today's complexities. This chamber deserves more than your stand-up routine. The jab landed harder this time, her stand-up routine quip echoing her earlier vaudeville dig. A few Democratic senators smirked, but Kennedy's grin didn't budge. He flipped a page in his binder, slow and deliberate, letting the silence build. Dusty cases, huh? Funny thing about the law. Old don't mean wrong. Panama refining says Congress sets the rules, not unelected folks in cubicles. But let's make it modern, since you're keen on that. Gundy v. United States. Few years back, court wrestled with non-delegation again. You said on air it was a nothing burger. Care to tell us why, when Justice Gorsuch's dissent called it a constitutional crisis waiting to happen? Maddow faltered, her fingers pausing on her notes. Gundy upheld the status quo, Senator. The dissent was just that, a dissent, not the law. You're cherry-picking to fit your narrative, which I must say aligns perfectly with your folksy theatrics. But her delivery lacked its usual snap, and the room caught it. Kennedy's questions weren't just probing, they were surgical, exposing gaps in her legal fluency that her broadcast polish couldn't mask. Cherry-pickin' Kennedy echoed, his voice rising just enough to carry a playful sting. Ma'am, I'm just reading the law, not spinning it. Gorsuch warned that handing agencies too much rope risks tying up the Constitution. You called that a yawn. So let's try something closer to home. You've been real vocal about how senators like me don't grasp the APA's nuts and bolts. All right, let's test that. Under motor vehicle manufacturers versus State Farm, what's the standard for an agency changing its mind on a rule arbitrary and capricious mean anything to you, or is that just another dusty phrase? The question hung like a thunderhead. Maddow's team shifted in their seats, one producer furiously tapping a tablet. She leaned forward, voice steady but strained. The arbitrary and capricious standard requires agencies to provide reasoned explanations for policy changes. State Farm ensures accountability, which I've covered extensively. But let's not pretend your homespun quips are a substitute for real analysis, Senator. This isn't a Louisiana porch swing. Kennedy's eyes twinkled, his drawl now a velvet blade. Porch swing, ma'am. I've argued cases where a bad call cost folks their jobs, not just their airtime. State Farm says an agency's got to show its work, clear, logical, grounded in evidence. You said on your show last spring that agencies can flip policies, long as they got a good story. That ain't the law, it's a soundbite. Want to try again, or should I walk you through it like a first-year law student? The chamber erupted in murmurs. Republican senators stifling grins, Democrats exchanging uneasy glances. Maddow's face flushed her response, stumbling into generalities about agency discretion. Kennedy didn't let up. Let's keep it rolling. You've called Chevron deference the backbone of modern governance, but in your book you wrote, it's virtually untouchable. Now, Loper Bright v. Raimondo turned that backbone to dust. Care to explain why you missed that one, or is your crystal ball on the fritz? Maddow's retort was swift but shaky. Loper Bright refined Chevron Senator, it didn't erase it. Agencies still need latitude to function. Your oversimplification, much like your drawl, makes for good theater, but it muddies the law. Yet her words lacked bite, and the room knew it. Kennedy's relentless precision, cloaked in his folksy veneer, was unraveling her. He pressed on, citing INS ver Chada, where she'd misstated the legislative veto's scope, and Youngstown Sheet and Tube ver Sawyer, where her take on executive power veered off course. Each error he exposed was a chink in her armor. Each quip, ma'am, that's the law, not a late-night monologue, drawing laughs and shares online. The climax came when Kennedy posed a deceptively simple question. Ms. Maddow, you've said folks like me turn hearings into circuses, so let's keep it plain. What's the test under INS v. Chadha for a legislative veto to pass constitutional muster? 2 sentences. Max, give us the law, not the script. Maddow hesitated, her eyes darting to her team. Chadha ruled that legislative vetoes violate the bicameralism and presentment clauses. It's about checks and balances. Her answer was technically correct, but vague, missing the nuance Kennedy sought. He pounced, voice low and deliberate. Close, but no cigar. Chadha says any action with legislative effect needs both chambers and the president full stop. You left that out on your show last fall, calling it a technicality. Ma'am, that technicality's the Constitution. Reckon you'd know that if you'd spent more time in court than on camera. The room exploded, gasps, chuckles, the clatter of keyboards as reporters raced to capture the moment. Maddow's poise cracked her next words, a flustered pivot to policy impacts. Kennedy leaned back, his grin now a full-on smile, the kind that said he'd landed the knockout. I'm just a country lawyer, Ms. Maddow, but I find the laws plenty clear when you read it instead of rewrite it. The chair banged the gavel for order, but the damage was done. Social media lit up Kennedy Clapback, trending globally clips of his country lawyer line amassing millions of views. Maddow's team scrambled, but Kennedy's counterstrike had turned the hearing into his arena. His folksy charm, not a weakness, but a weapon sharpened by decades of legal grit. The Senate chamber buzzed with a restless electricity as Senator John Neely Kennedy, his Louisiana drawl, now a honed edge, sat back with a glint in his eye, savoring the silence that followed his latest exchange with Rachel Maddow. The MSNBC titan, her usual polish fraying, gripped her notes tightly. Her earlier confidence shaken by Kennedy's relentless barrage of precise legal questions cloaked in his signature Southern wit. Her jabs at his vaudeville act and folksy shtick had backfired, exposing not his weakness, but her own gaps in legal fluency that no amount of broadcast charisma could conceal. The gallery, packed with reporters, aides, and spectators, leaned forward, sensing the crescendo of a showdown that was no longer just a hearing, but a cultural flashpoint. Social media was ablaze with #Kennedy Clapback, and the next few minutes would cement this moment as a viral juggernaut, reshaping perceptions of both combatants and sparking a broader reckoning about expertise in the public square. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, the faintest smirk playing on his lips like a seasoned lawyer knowing the jury was his. "Miss Maddow," he began, his voice a warm drawl laced with steel. "You've been mighty generous with your opinions on how folks like me don't measure up to your brand of legal smarts. Said on your show last month that senators leaning on old-school law degrees are playing checkers in a chess world. I reckon that's a clever turn of phrase, but let's see if you can back it up. Tell me plain as day, what's the standard under Youngstown sheet and tube v. Sawyer for limiting executive power?" 2 sentences, no fluff, just the law. The room stilled, the weight of the question hanging heavy. Youngstown was a cornerstone case, a constitutional law staple that any serious legal commentator should know. Cold. Maddow, sensing the trap, straightened in her seat, her voice steady but cautious. Youngstown established that executive actions must align with congressional authority, or the Constitution itself. It's about checks on unilateral power. Her answer was broad, skirting specifics, and the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes didn't escape Kennedy's notice. He leaned forward, his drawl now a slow, deliberate cadence, each word landing like a pebble in a still pond. "Well, ma'am, that's a start, but it's like saying a gumbo needs spice without naming the cayenne. Youngstown's got 3 zones, executive power's strongest, with Congress's blessing, weakest when Congress says no, and a gray patch in between. You missed that on your show calling it a vague limit last spring. So let's make it simpler. What's the test in Zone 3, the lowest ebb when the president's acting against Congress's will? Go on, enlighten us." Maddow's pause was a beat too long, her fingers rifling through her notes as her team exchanged nervous glances. "Zone 3 requires the president to rely solely on constitutional authority, absent congressional approval," she said, her tone clipped. It's a high bar, as I've explained in my coverage, but her delivery lacked conviction, and the room caught it a stumble on a question any practicing attorney would ace. Kennedy's grin widened, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "High bar, sure, but you left out the meat, Ms. Maddow. Justice Jackson's framework says the president's power in Zone 3 is at its nadir. Courts'll slap it down unless it's rooted in clear constitutional text. You called it vague on air, but it's the law's backbone. Reckon that's what happens when you trade courtrooms for cameras." The gallery erupted in stifled chuckles, Republican senators nodding, while Democrats shifted uncomfortably. Twitter lit up clips of Kennedy's courtrooms for cameras line racking up thousands of shares in minutes. Maddow, her face tightening, tried to pivot. "Senator, your knack for turning hearings into a Louisiana hoedown is charming, But it doesn't change the fact that Youngstown's nuances are debated by scholars, not settled by sound bites. Your law degree might have served you well in local courts, but this is a national stage. Her jab at his hoedown style drew a few smiles from her allies, but it felt forced, a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. Kennedy didn't bite. Instead, he flipped open his slim binder, the rustle of pages amplifying the tension. National stage, huh? Well, ma'am, the law don't change just 'cause the cameras got brighter. Let's try another, since you're fond of scholars. You said last fall that the non-delegation doctrine's a dead letter, about as relevant as a flip phone in a 5G world. But in Gundy v. United States, Justice Gorsuch's dissent made waves warning that Congress handing agencies too much power risks the Constitution's balance. Care to tell us why you dismissed that as noise, or is that another case you skimmed for a segment? Maddow's response came faster this time, but it was shaky. Gundy upheld delegated authority, Senator. The dissent was speculative, not binding. Your reliance on it is like betting on a horse that didn't place. She leaned back, hoping the quip would land, but the room's energy had shifted decisively. Kennedy's questions weren't just exposing her errors. They were dismantling her aura of unassailable expertise. He chuckled, a low rumble that filled the chamber. Speculative, Ma'am. Gorsuch's dissent flagged a crisis, agencies acting like mini-congresses without a leash. You called it noise on your show, but the court's been inching his way like in West Virginia v. EPA. Maybe you missed that busy polishing your next monologue. The line drew outright laughter from the Republican side, even a few Democrats cracking smiles. Maddow's team scrambled one aide, whispering urgently, but the damage was mounting. Kennedy pressed his advantage, his drawl now a rhythmic cadence that held the room captive. Let's wrap this with something real basic first-year law stuff. Under motor vehicle manufacturers v. State Farm, what's the test for an agency reversing its own policy? You said on air it's just good faith. That's a mighty big swing, Ms. Maddow. Want to take another crack at it, or should I draw you a map? Maddow's composure cracked visibly, her voice sharp with frustration. The arbitrary and capricious standard requires a reasoned explanation, Senator. I've covered this extensively. But let's not pretend your folksy act is a substitute for real legal rigor. This isn't a backwoods courtroom. Her backwoods dig was a last-ditch effort to claw back ground. But it fell flat, the room sensing she was grasping at straws. Kennedy leaned back, his grin now a full-on smile, the kind that said he'd won the round and knew it. Backwoods, ma'am. I've argued cases where a bad day meant a family lost their farm, not a dip in Nielsen ratings. State Farm says an agency's got to show its work. Data logic, no flip-flops without cause. You called it good faith last March like it's a handshake deal. That ain't the law, it's a bumper sticker. The chamber roared, the chair banging the gavel, as reporters typed furiously, live tweeting the exchange. Kennedy dunks soared to the top of Twitter trends, clips of bumper sticker going viral across platforms. The high watermark came when Kennedy posed one final question, simple yet devastating. Ms. Maddow, you've said folks like me make a mockery of this chamber with our talk, so let's settle it. What's the core holding of INS vs. Chadha on legislative vetoes? One sentence, plain as pie. It was a law school 101 question, a layup for anyone claiming legal expertise. Maddow hesitated, her eyes darting to her notes, then back to Kennedy. Chadha struck down legislative vetoes as unconstitutional, violating bicameralism and presentment, she said, her voice steady but lacking depth. Kennedy's eyes twinkled, his drawl softening to a near whisper. That's the headline, ma'am, but you missed the heart. Chadha says any legislative act veto or otherwise needs both chambers and the president, no shortcuts. You called it a minor procedural snag on your show. That snags the Constitution, Ms. Maddow, and it ain't minor. The room fell silent, save for the hum of cameras capturing every second. Maddow's face flushed her response, a weak pivot to policy implications, but the fight had gone out of her. Kennedy's relentless precision, wrapped in his folksy charm, had turned her own weapon, her wit, against her. The fallout was immediate and seismic. Within minutes, clips of Kennedy's bumper sticker and courtroom not cameras lines flooded social media, racking up millions of views. Progressive outlets tried to spin it as a partisan ambush, but even their commentators admitted Maddow had been outmatched. CNN's Jeffrey Toobin tweeted, "Kennedy's folksy act hides a legal scalpel. Maddow didn't see it coming." Conservative sites crowed, with Breitbart headlining Bayou Barrister School's MSNBC star. Legal Twitter erupted, with professors from Yale to Tulane dissecting Maddow's errors, one calling it a master class in what happens when media polish meets courtroom grit. Maddow's reputation took a hit. Her nightly show, usually a bastion of progressive confidence, saw a dip in viewership as clips of her fumbles circulated. Her team issued a statement framing the hearing as theatrical gotcha politics, but it rang hollow. Kennedy, meanwhile, emerged as a folk hero. His Louisiana office was flooded with calls from supporters, his mailbag overflowing with praise. Law schools invited him to guest lecture, and his next floor speech drew record views on C-SPAN. The hearing had flipped the script. Maddow's attempt to paint him as a lightweight had only burnished his credentials, proving that his hoe-down style was no mask but a megaphone for his expertise. The broader ripple effect was undeniable. Pundits began questioning the role of media figures claiming legal authority without recent practice. Blogs sprouted analyzing Maddow's missteps on Youngstown Gundy and Chadha, while Kennedy's quips became memes, not a bumper sticker emblazoned on TikTok edits. The clash didn't just elevate Kennedy. It sparked a reckoning about who gets to speak for the law, and whether charm, when backed by substance, could outshine studio sheen. As the chair called a recess, Kennedy gathered his notes, offering Maddow a nod. "Good spar, ma'am. Look forward to your next broadcast." The room knew he'd won, and the world was about to find out. The echoes of Senator John Neely Kennedy's clash with Rachel Maddow reverberated far beyond the Senate chamber, transforming a single hearing into a defining moment in American political discourse. The viral clips of Kennedy's folksy yet surgical takedown, his bumper sticker quip, and courtroom not cameras jab had reshaped perceptions, elevating him to a national figure while forcing a humbled Maddow to recalibrate. The fallout wasn't just personal. It sparked a broader conversation about expertise, authenticity, and the power of preparation. As the dust settled, Kennedy's triumph became a teachable moment, a lesson in how substance wrapped in genuine style could outshine polished bravado, leaving a lasting impact on politics, media, and the legal profession. Kennedy emerged as a symbol of grounded expertise. His Louisiana office was inundated with letters from constituents praising his blend of wit and wisdom, while law schools from LSU to Georgetown invited him to speak, citing his hearing performance as a masterclass in cross-examination. His Senate profile soared, with colleagues across the aisle noting his ability to make arcane law relatable. In a post-hearing interview with NPR, Kennedy deflected the hype with his trademark humility. "Folks, I'm just a lawyer trying to keep the Constitution honest. Ain't about winning, it's about getting it right." His words resonated, reinforcing his image as the Bayou barrister whose folksy charm amplified, not masked, his legal rigor. Maddow, meanwhile, faced a reckoning. Her show's ratings dipped, as viewers questioned her legal credibility with social media, amplifying her missteps on Youngstown Gundy and Chadha. She pivoted on air, inviting practicing attorneys as guests and focusing on policy over precedent, a tacit admission of overreach. In a rare introspective moment on MSNBC, she acknowledged, "I may have underestimated the depth of Senate hearings. It's a reminder to stay sharp." Her audience forgave, but the lesson lingered. Broadcast polish couldn't substitute for courtroom scars. The broader impact was profound. The hearing sparked a national dialogue about who qualifies to speak on legal matters. Legal blogs and journals ran pieces on the Kennedy effect, urging pundits to ground claims in practice, not just credentials. The American Bar Association issued a statement emphasizing the need for ongoing legal education, subtly referencing the dangers of outdated expertise. Media outlets, from CNN to Fox, began booking more active practitioners as analysts wary of another public fumble. The phrase "pulling a Kennedy" entered the lexicon, meaning to dismantle an opponent's hubris with facts and flair. The educational takeaway was clear, especially for young professionals. Law schools incorporated the hearing into curricula, using Kennedy's questioning as a case study in effective advocacy. Students, particularly from underrepresented regions like the South, saw his success as proof that authenticity, folksy or otherwise, paired with preparation, could trump elitism. At a Tulane law commencement, Kennedy spoke to this, "Don't let nobody tell you your voice don't matter, 'cause it ain't polished. Study hard, know your stuff, and speak your truth." That's the law's real power. The legacy endured. Kennedy's star rose, his legislative clout growing as he championed bills with newfound gravitas. Maddow adapted her commentary, gaining a layer of caution, ensuring claims were fact-checked. The hearing reshaped discourse, demanding accountability from those claiming expertise. It taught a generation that real authority comes from work, not wattage, from practice, not performance. As Kennedy put it in a viral clip, "The law ain't a show, it's a service." That truth, delivered with a drawl and a wink, changed the game, proving that in the arena of ideas, preparation and heart always win.